However, there were a lot of people who were bringing it into it, especially in the keynotes. There were a lot of clever,
Mhm.
uses of AI and video AI and deep fake AI to just sort of make a point about
Mhm.
security. So I think probably next year will be the year at RSA where you'll see a lot of marketing materials um, on that topic.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the 401 Access Denied podcast. I'm the host, Joe Carson. It's a pleasure to be here. And I'm really excited about today's episode. We're always looking to bring really educational, fun, knowledgeable content to you. And today we've got a returning guest and is an amazing person. So I'm going to pass it over to Bob to introduce yourself. Tell us about who you are, what you do, and a little bit of background about
Yeah,
yourself.
sure. Thanks, Joseph. Appreciate the invite and thanks for bringing me back again. So I'm Bob Burns. I'm a chief product security officer with a company called Thales. In particular, their cloud security division, and I uh, run and manage a team of very talented individuals who we look after the product security, security engineering, our service cloud security. As well as certification and compliance. So all that just to say is we're sort of entrusted with making sure that we're meeting all the promises that we're making our
Mhm.
customers from a security standpoint. So I actually got my start as a software engineer back in the day, many years ago, before security was a keyword in our industry. So I spent a
Mhm.
lot of time mucking around in cryptography and doing security that way, and eventually sort of found my way into this position where I get to sort of bring these teams together, get the right people focused on the right
Mhm.
problems. We get to tackle some really cool challenges across our product line and services.
Fantastic. That's what was the code? What was the language you started off with?
So
Just
really
curious.
C. I mean, everything was, yeah,
See,
everything back in the day
okay,
was low level. Anytime you're doing crypto, it was,
yeah,
smart cards or embedded processors, microcontrollers, all of that stuff. So we did a lot of hardware. But I've
fantastic.
I've
Yeah,
cut the gamut. But now I really leave the hardcore coding to the experts these days. I just try to focus on the security side of things.
yeah. I mean, absolutely. Security was always an afterthought or something we did at
Right.
the end rather than something we did did at the beginning. And so, okay, we are changing it a bit. So, and one of the things we've got a habit of doing is meeting up at
Yeah.
different events. And most recently, we did get to catch up again during B sides and
Yes.
RSA. I'm just curious to get kind of your viewpoint. Was there any interesting talks or topics? What did you find some of the key takeaways from both B sides and RSA?
Yeah, that's a great question. I did have to go back and look at my notes a little bit to reflect because it
Yeah.
it feels like it was yesterday, but it was like drinking from a fire hose again. Just lots and lots of interesting people, lots and lots of topics.
Yes.
Really, really cut across the gamut. And I'm not challenging your readers, I mean your viewers, to necessarily go back and look at our episode from last year. But
Mm-hmm.
in general, my takeaway from last year was that it was really about sort of the human element. There were a lot of things that spoke to
Yes.
me
Mm-hmm.
as far as, sort of we were coming out of COVID. There was really a lot about teams and about, managing
Mm-hmm.
burnout and dealing with sort of bringing people
Yes.
together. And I really came energized out of that with
Mm-hmm.
that same feel. However, this year I didn't get the same vibe. I didn't get the same feeling. I
Mm-hmm.
felt it was a little bit more, for me personally, was more scattershot. I found that the sessions I went to were a little less deep in my perspective.
Okay.
But having said that, what I did really resonate with, and what I really did sort of connect with, was still around the team aspect. There were a lot of good
Mm-hmm.
topics on scaling. So
Mm-hmm.
how do you take something that you know how to do well and make it bigger, make it more? How do you
Mm-hmm.
affect more teams? How do you affect more people without burning out your own team and without really sort of
Yeah.
dragging those dimensions down? So overall, I found some of the best ones that I had still really focused on the team aspect. It focused on
Mm-hmm.
scaling and being able to better secure cloud environments. That was the other big focus that I focused on, was really thinking about cloud services and being able to provide security on a large scale for all of your customers.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the big things I noticed between last year and this year was also it was almost back to what our RSA originally was from an attendance
Yeah,
perspective. So where last year you had a bit more flexibility in choosing the sessions, where this year you had to think ahead because there was a lot of long lines. A lot of the main sessions were there was a lot of queues, and even the standby queue was
yeah,
quite large. So there's a lot more planning. You had to really be selective into the sessions attending this year because you might not have got to the one that you wanted to
yeah.
see. And the good thing as well is a lot of the sessions are now becoming they're now becoming available online as well. So you can go back if you did miss them, you can go back and at least watch them now. So which is great as well. But you mentioned about I think that's a really important thing is about scaling. And that's always a challenge we've had is doing something really well. Did that also incorporate into things because we're still in that little the post COVID, which we're still in hybrid mode. Did it kind of go into some of those things about remote teams and hybrid, and about how to keep connected and how to make sure people aren't feeling like in their own little silo to make sure that they feel part of a team? Did it cover any of those aspects of things?
So interestingly enough, I didn't hit any sessions that were about that. But one of my biggest joys in this past session was really meeting people outside of the sessions. So in addition to
Mm-hmm.
connecting and reconnecting with folks like
Yeah.
you and other industry folks that I'm friends with across the businesses, I really got most of my energy and excitement out of meeting people in social settings and doing things. And to your point about sort of post COVID and scaling. One of the gentlemen I
Mm-hmm.
met was actually from Industrial Light and Magic. And so we just sort of
Okay.
randomly bumped into each other. Hey, what do you do? What do you do? And we really got into the, sort of what happened during COVID. And it hadn't occurred to me, but, ILM had some really, really interesting challenges around remote. They instantly
Mm-hmm.
went remote. And unlike a traditional enterprise, their assets, number one, are hugely expensive, right? You don't want those leaking on the
Yep.
internet. And number two, they are, terabytes in size. You can't instantly
Mm-hmm.
ask all of your employees at home to all of a sudden deal with, having to render huge media files in on their kids' home
Yep.
computer that they just happen to have sitting around, right? I had a really great conversation with him about the transition to remote and how that looked very different to what our teams did and the types of security
Mm-hmm.
challenges. So his role obviously was on the security side, but they really had to think about, how did that go? And then also, how are they transitioning back to the office and how do they support that hybrid mode? So going back to your
Mm-hmm.
point about, sort of that moving towards that way, I can think of things in my team's perspective and my enterprise's perspective, but
Mm-hmm.
you get to meet at these shows people who have a completely different problem set that they have to solve for and things that they have to sort of think of from a security standpoint that really blows your mind. You think, oh my God, it's completely different from a Word
Mm-hmm.
file or a source code file or something like that, or a threat model to oh my gosh, you've got something that if it got out onto the internet would be hugely damaging or at least expensive for a company like ILM.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen. I mean, one of the absolutely you highlighted an important part is that for me, RSA is all mostly about the networking. The sessions are the add-on. That's the additional part. But the meeting the people, because that's where you hear. The sessions are great for that general view and kind of give you some outline or some direction. But meeting the people and hearing their experiences and challenges, that's what really gives you a bit of more perspective into, and you can learn from each other as well how they're doing things on a much more kind of a detailed level. And I also find the same as well. When you're working, a lot of friends of mine work in the entertainment media industry as well, and they're having to do like rendering lots of images, and to do those you can't do them remotely. It's very
Hmm.
difficult, and the processing part to do it is large. So even they had a more of an office rotation scenario. So there where people can come in, do the rendering, at least having fewer people in the office at any one time, and also having that controlled ledger, of who was at the office at that time
Yeah.
as well. But definitely finding a lot of interesting things is always kind of to learn from those, and other industries where working hybrid or working remote is sometimes not
Hmm.
possible. There's a lot of industries where it's either very highly secure that you're working in, let's say not so much air gap systems, but very, very sensitive environments where you have to be physically there in person. and you don't want to have them open, public access or remote access becomes very, very challenging. So yes, we still, those environments do exist, and it means that you have to think about a way to keep them operating. What other things did you learn about? You talked a bit about cloud security, and one big takeaway that I saw was around in cloud security was around API security, which was a big hot topic. It was around basically we've started seeing where API has become the glue to keep things holding together. And sometimes I've seen like hard coded credentials. I've seen tokenized credentials. APIs, and then if you're in between clouds, it's what's keeping the clouds connected together. These hybrid clouds and multi clouds. So what was a big takeaway when you kind of look at from a cloud security perspective? What was the kind of hot topics there?
Yeah, and you hit on probably one of the biggest, at least visible trends that I saw at RSA, and besides a little bit as well, was the API is the new perimeter for services, right? It's the new
Yes.
buzzword, right? And it's and rightfully so, right? It is the
Mhm,
connection point. The reality
mhm,
is that now businesses and services are connecting. Less through sales and more through consuming APIs. It becomes that your developers are now the
mhm,
ones making the decisions of who you're going to connect with and why and what that
yeah,
interface looks like. So that becomes the primary touch point, and it's just
mhm,
natural that that becomes the point at which a service can become vulnerable, or you could end up losing money because someone steals your
mhm,
credentials or uses your API or overconsumes. So there was a great deal of, I would say, a lot more marketing and certainly a lot more buzz around products
mhm,
and services that could secure that interface.
mhm,
From my personal perspective, I think that we're seeing a little bit of hype in that area. I think it's
mhm,
probably a little bit overhyped. Is that there's certainly a lot of energy and marketing around it. However,
mhm,
APIs have a fairly well understood mechanism for doing authentication and
yep,
access, and limiting, and certainly hiding behind proxies and gateways. And
mhm,
so I think that overall it is important. I think overall it is something that needs to be taken seriously. I think each
mhm,
enterprise has to look at it differently, but ultimately it's one of those things that doesn't cause me to lose any sleep overnight thinking about those types of things. But generally, it is it
yeah,
is it is something that I think the difference now is that it is the interface. It has moved from login selections to being
mhm,
able to automate and pull stuff off. So it is the primary touch point between enterprises and services now. So it is getting a lot of attention.
absolutely. Absolutely. And talking about the hype, there was a lot of talk around AI and machine learning and other types of things. What was your viewpoint? Did you attend any sessions that AI or ML in it, or did you I know a lot of the vendors had a lot of AI
Yeah.
was it solutions. What was your takeaway from an AI perspective from
Yeah,
RSA as well?
that was actually a good point, and I brought that up to my teams when I came back. I feel like the attendance, or I should say, the submissions at RSA kind of missed or predated the AI hype window. So there weren't
Yeah.
actually a lot of talks that necessarily titled or focused on AI. However, there were a lot of people who are bringing it into it, especially in the keynotes. There were a lot of clever, uses of AI and video AI and deep fake AI to just sort of make a point about security. So I think probably next year will be the year at RSA where you'll see a lot of marketing materials. Um, on that topic. So to answer your question, no, I didn't see
Yeah.
any specific topics
Mhm,
on it. However, for the few things that I did see, I think it's an emerging technology. I think it's going to be really interesting. I
mhm,
think it has a lot of impact on the security industry, especially in our business. Right? There's a
mhm.
lot of motion around things like Copilot or things that are auto generating
Yeah.
code for you. What's the impact of feeding some of your own code snippets into it, especially if it's sensitive code snippets? There's a
Mhm,
lot of privacy information around that. I think we're really early days. I think there's just still a lot to come and a lot to learn. I've done a little
Absolutely.
experimenting myself and had a little bit of fun. Um, I'm certainly not as afraid of large language models as a lot of people would make it out to be. It's a great technology as long as you're using it for what it's
Mhm.
designed for, and as long as you understand the
Yep.
limitations. But I'm not predicting any sort of AI Armageddon anytime soon from a hyper intense autocomplete language engine. So
Yeah, it's a predictive
yeah.
texting.
Yeah.
That's
And it's good.
what
It's
we're
it's
really at
amazing.
is,
I love
and
it. It
it
is
is good.
really interesting. I
Yeah.
mean, I've seen it's great to see that, and especially the artistic ones.
Mm.
The artwork ones, I think are very interesting.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of ethical concerns. There's also concerns about
Mhm.
licensing. Where are they getting the source material to feed this, et cetera, et cetera. But
Yes, the copyright, data rights management issues, privacy
exactly.
issues.
But from a security standpoint,
Um, uh,
we
uh,
think about things like code provenance or even the source
mhm,
material provenance. Are we consuming data that could cause an issue or create a security issue? And
mhm.
conversely, are we leaking information? If we're
Yep.
using these types of tools and these types of engines, is this potentially sending sensitive information or intellectual property to somewhere that would not treat it
Mhm.
as such and end up inadvertently exposing it elsewhere? So those are our primary
Yep.
security concerns around using those types of tools.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of organizations going and putting a lot of policies around their development kind of
Yeah,
processes about restrictive use and what they can and can't
yeah,
do. So until it becomes more
yeah,
clear about how you can use it in a secure private
yeah,
way. So absolutely. One of the big things I found, so even from day one of RSA, I thought that was quite interesting. A lot of the day one sessions I found was very focused around the C level side of kind of the topics. So it got into lots of things around, getting budget and communicating with the board and communicating with executives, and there's a bit of insurance in there. So it was very much around the communication side of things. I thought it was interesting because absolutely we do need to become better communicators, especially at being able to translate security challenges and security priorities into something that boards understand. Is there anything that you find around those topics that was interesting or that was valuable for you?
I actually didn't attend those sessions. I did see them, but it actually
Mhm.
makes up a large part of my life is being the translator between real security risk and convincing boards. I
Mhm.
do find it interesting in this. I think there was a plethora of sessions on that topic. I think
Mhm.
part of it is probably driven by some of the contraction in our industry, right? There were a lot of companies who
Mhm.
were certainly tightening belts and changing their financial posture.
Yep.
And I think when that happens, what you need a voice who can make sure that the priorities are being brought to the decision makers in the
Mhm.
most efficient way possible. And that's constantly been a struggle, right? Is that
Mhm.
we always think that CEOs are the pinnacle of thinking about risk all the time. They run their business like risk. If you
Yep.
can just talk in risk and speak in the risk language, they'll make the right
Mhm.
decisions. But the reality is they're all human like anybody else, right? And they
Yep.
have to make decisions with lots of inputs, with lots of different things, and they're balancing it based
Mhm.
upon where their business is at. So it's more than just being able to talk about risk. It's being able to put
Mhm.
to tell the story in the context of what the business mission is and what you're trying to achieve
Yep.
and what the current pressures on the business are. A lot of times you've got to sort of give and take. It's not black and white as
Mhm.
much as we want a red light, green light for security that just says this is secure and this is not secure. If it's not secure, fix it. It's never that
Mhm.
easy, especially at scale. So being able to bridge that gap between your technical experts
Mhm.
and the people who actually are running the ship and making sure that you're being
Mhm.
safe and you're doing the right things, and translating that into actionable plans and costs and budgets for the C
Mhm.
level, I think is a really important underutilized skill. And I'm really glad to see that they've done a lot of sessions, and we're starting to see more of that conversation of bridging that gap between what do we do to how do we make sure it fits within the bigger
Yeah.
plan.
Absolutely. Is it all? I think Eva, I attended a workshop as well during RSA, which was all about risk quantification, which was all for me was really interesting to get a CFO's
Mm-hmm.
perspective and the CEO's perspective, into risk quantification. To your point, it was really about kind of into where are our risks related to the business, not related to security, but to the business, and then translating those into from the security into that business element, and then also where's the business resiliency, how we applying that side of things. So I think it's probably, I think a lot of some of the sessions I attended which were that focus, it was a lot of new people who were just going into the CISO, because I think the CISO and the BISO had been two areas of significant growth. And I think a lot of new kind of last year, a lot of organizations have decided to take on that as a significant role. So there was a lot of let's say 1 or 2 year experience CISOs that were attending the sessions that were really, I think, finding it challenging to communicate, and not they don't have the experience about, they've a very technical background but not so much the business element. And I think that's where they're kind of learning. And I think it was great to see that, because it is important to make sure that we have that continuous education, knowledge sharing, for in order to those who are starting the roles, because there's very few resources around. There's some good books in there. There's very few resources that teach you the business element of it, especially if you're coming from a technical background. So finding those is really important. Any other highlights? Any other things that was kind of significant or memorable moments that you found?
Well, I mean, besides the amazing session on gamifying hacking that I happened to see,
I
that I
wonder who
attend,
did
I'm
that.
not, I can't remember the person, but they were quite good. They did a great demo. They were very risky and took on the demo gods and came through very
Yeah.
well. Um, I think that again, I'm struggling a little bit just because I really came away and none of the sessions necessarily really kind of came at me hard, and it really
Mm-hmm.
was the personal conversations and the connections I
The
made.
personal conversations.
And it cut across the gamut. It was really really
Mm-hmm.
things, and the things I love is it's people with very different backgrounds than me that came up in different
Mm-hmm.
ways. In one in particular was I met a woman who started in help desk at a construction company out on the West Coast,
Mm-hmm.
and she is essentially the CISO now, out over many many
Whoa.
years
Okay.
of just sort of caring and being the one who really sort of thought about what was the right thing to do versus the wrong thing to do,
Mm-hmm.
and just sort of plowed her way through, and took on the company and took on the responsibility, and ultimately ended up
Mm-hmm.
driving that. And those are the things I
Uh,
learn when I see these different stories from different people, and that's the thing that really I think I take away from these sessions and really inspire me to make
mm-hmm.
changes and focus on other things in my team. And I think on that. Oh,
And a
sorry.
lot
Go
of
ahead.
times, yeah, yeah, a lot of times the help desk is that in between the tech and the business side of things. So they're the ones that know when certain things aren't
Yeah.
working in the business. They're the ones that identify where the tech is
Yeah.
failing. So they do become very good at being able to make that connection,
Exactly. Exactly.
and are potentially very good BISOs and CISOs of the future for
Yeah,
sure.
for sure. Yeah, exactly. And I think along those topics, so when we go back and, just even though I can't narrow and
Hmm.
focus in on one specific session, a number of the sessions that I was at least drawn to attend were really around scalability, about
Hmm.
how you do this from a secure standpoint. So whether you're taking a service that maybe hasn't had security to start with and you're trying to make it bigger,
Hmm.
or you're taking your security function and trying to scale it much more broadly. It covered a lot of topics, but in retrospect, when I started sort of dissecting it and peeling it apart, the
Hmm.
things I took away from it is that the language and the systems that people were describing to help with scalability of security
Hmm.
in these systems really boiled down to empathy, and it had
Hmm.
to do with the fact
Interesting.
that and it wasn't stated explicitly, but when you start thinking about DevSecOps or some way of
Hmm.
being able to build security champion programs, or being able to get more advocates in your organization who care about security, or even to the point where you're communicating at the CEO level. At the end of the day, success is either done by, sort of one or a small group of people who can understand a vertical intimately and can do it top to bottom, and
Hmm.
ultimately they care, so they deliver the security from top to bottom. Or you end up having a very large swath of people who all care, and
Hmm.
can bring security across. But you can't do that. You've got to be able to break that down. And for me,
Hmm.
the point is for security people to understand and empathize with the real problem that other people are trying to solve. You know,
Hmm.
DevOps or DevSecOps was really about taking devs and making them care about ops by making them, have skin in the game. Security champion programs, when you look at them, they're really about embedding inside the developers, someone who cares about
Yeah.
security. So it really is about how do you take an empathetic view to making
Hmm.
sure that you are not just foisting security on people, and you're not just throwing it over the fence, and you're not just writing policies, but you're actually striving to empathize with the problems up and down the stack
Yeah.
and figure out how to build, build advocates, champions, people who care about it, or you just caring about their
Hmm.
problems, so that you're not introducing toil. Right. And that's sort of
Yeah.
what I've pivoted
Absolutely.
to, coming out of this show a little bit, is really helping to find ways to strengthen empathy between what we're trying to do and how we can help the teams start in a more default secure state, and add security without
Hmm.
introducing toil. Yeah,
Default.
yeah,
That's default is the
yeah.
important thing, because that's one of the things I've been kind of is we always talk about this, shifting left and security by design. But for me, it needs to be more than that. It needs to be security by default. It needs to be always on. It needs to be. It, I remember seeing, one of the cloud companies, saying that you need to turn the default security on, and I laughed. I was like,
Yeah,
shouldn't it be on
yeah,
already? Why do I need to turn the default basic security settings on? My expectation would be called default.
yeah.
That's it. I shouldn't need to
I think
turn it
you're
on.
using that word wrong.
But
Yeah.
you mentioned an important point. Yeah, you mentioned an important point is that we really need to pull down the silos. And security's been we always look at security as an IT problem, as an we direct it to IT. And I learned an important lesson when I was doing it was a risk assessment for a large transportation company, and ultimately one of the lessons I learned was that we can't operate in security as a separate silo anymore. It needs to be We need to realize that security is something. Yes, we do have IT security related needs, but we also have HR security needs, we have sales security needs, we have financial security needs. And this gets into I recently did some large kind of research in the business resiliency side of things, and as I was going down that path I realized that resiliency is many things. You have financial resiliency, which could be going down the path of cyber insurance. You have business resiliency, which goes down the path of maybe having a good backup in its response and kind of backup strategy plan, and business resiliency. Like you've got operational resiliency. Okay, do we have two of everything? Do we have manual systems? And it really gets into kind of thinking about those, and looking how you can look at the different lines of business or different business operations, and then trying to get security as part of those. And I think you brought an important part is that where I look at it, cyber ambassadors or cyber mentors, or really looking to get people in other parts of the business to become your advocate in those areas. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a tech person. It needs to be somebody who is understands the business that they're operating in, whether it being in the financial team or whether it being in the sales team, and they can understand. To your point, empathy is really take they believe in what they're doing, and they believe security is an important part of it, and they become your communicator, your way into those businesses. And it becomes really important. One of the things I remember when I first did this, um, the best people to actually become those mentors and ambassadors were victims of cybercrime. It was the people who actually had something, they knew what it meant to become a victim. They knew the damage it could cause. And they wanted to make sure that it wouldn't happen again. And that they became some of the best advocates to really taking that message on, and then becoming one of the best ways to it's getting that security by default, and by and by culture, because ultimately they start kind of messaging and sharing with the people around them and caring about it as
Yeah,
well.
and because they felt the pain, right? I mean, those people who've had
Yep.
experience, and that's one form of empathy, right? Because they've been through it and
Hmm.
they've done it, and part of it is it's kind of two ways. You have to, they care about what you're trying to achieve, but
Hmm.
sometimes you've got to care about what faces them, right? What are their problems?
Yep.
What are their business goals? And what are they trying to achieve? What is in their day to day? It may be simple to say, oh, well, we've created this
Hmm.
really good security onboarding system. Just create this Jira ticket. But if you go to somebody
Hmm.
whose day to day job doesn't afford them the opportunity to easily create a ticket, or if creating a ticket is not,
Hmm.
they're not a developer, they're somewhere else in the organization, and to them Jira is just some funny word that you're making up. That's not really understanding their problem, right? Or how they want to do it. And
Yep.
sometimes you might think you're automating it or making it easy, but if you don't actually empathize and understand what it takes in an organization to be able to do
Hmm.
that, you're not necessarily taking it all into account. And it's going both ways. So again, I don't have a specific recipe, but I think that
Hmm.
empathy is one of the key messages that I think is going to play an
Hmm.
important role in ensuring scalability across a diverse population. So
Yeah, absolutely. It becomes an enabler when people start seeing security is
mhm,
helping them. And this is one of the things that we've had a lot of discussions with some peers of mine as well. Is that we have a security image problem, that we've always been the no people. We the ones that slow machines down, and we put all these processes and barriers in front of But we really need to get to the point where we have to change that image, that they see it as more of an enabler that helps them do their job. And this is an important part. I think you're absolutely right. It is a two-way communication, because and it does mean that in our roles in cybersecurity, we have to become much better listeners, because we've always been historically policy enforcers. We're looking at, here's the framework, and here's the policies that supports that framework, and therefore everybody must follow it. And if you go outside it, then you're basically creating risk. So we became policy enforcers, and I do believe that we need to become much more better listeners, because we have to realize that. And it's always great, is we're here to not just protect computer systems and IT systems, but we're here to protect the services that they deliver and the people that's
mhm,
using them. And it really gets into where we need to be understanding about what the people using them, what they get measured on, what success look for like for them, what's their metrics that says that they're doing their job well. And we can't put things that actually slow them down at achieving those goals, or that preventing them from achieving those goals. So it really means that we have to become, how do I help them do that in a better way, in a safe way, that actually even accelerates them on that path and makes it much more achievable. And that's where you get to the point where it becomes that bi-directional. Is if you're able to achieve that for people, they will in turn accept you more, and be willing to support you and voice you, and promote you. And I think that's one of the things we have to change, is we have to take down this image problem that we've got of being the fear of policy enforcers, to really being enablers. We've a long way to go, but absolutely, absolutely, people like yourself, that have the ability to change that in organizations, will really make a big difference. And the more we get doing that, that will over time take security from being the scary place to being actually something that's
yeah.
fun, that people enjoy, and that is actually helping us do our jobs better. So I think that's a really important topic, and it's a difficult one to do, because in organizations, culture is one thing, and behavior, those are things that take time. It's not something you can simply do overnight. It's a very well thought through strategy, that you have to do it in little pieces and pieces over time, to and sometimes in one department first, and another department next. And so, I mean, how are how's your strategy going, and have you already kind of seen any progress so far? Are you in the early phase of this? How are you seeing progress so far?
It's been a constant journey. So and I would say progress is slow, but it has always moved forward. And I think
Mhm.
part of it is I think the industry is helping somewhat. Is that security is becoming
Hmm.
more and more of an important topic at all levels in the
Yeah.
business, right? As the risks increase, and the news talks about ransomware a lot, and risks to
Hmm.
businesses, et cetera. That sort of accelerates some of the conversations that we need to have.
Hmm.
And frankly, I think the technology is changing. I think that we're getting better and
Hmm.
better um, uh, capabilities to be able to make these things, as you say, the default, um, by having vendors and our own implementations, that we start from a
Hmm.
more secure set of guardrails or paved roads. I think that
Hmm.
that has gone, but there's still a lot more to do. And I think especially as
Hmm.
we expand into the cloud and we get much broader surface areas, much bigger estates of compute and data, you mix in other compliance challenges like GDPR
Hmm.
and privacy and a few
Hmm.
other things. It's really sort of it's been a challenge. But I will say I think things have changed. I've seen a lot of different improvements. I
Hmm.
think one of the just sort of a prototypical example, and this isn't necessarily our organization, but I always think of the prototype of phishing emails and the classic
Hmm.
security, hey, let's test all the users by sending out the scary email and see who clicks on it, right? I mean, that was the control du jour, many years
Hmm.
ago. But thinking has really come around and said, we really shouldn't tell users whose job it is to click on things to not click on things. Instead, let's
Yeah.
make some tools and techniques. Let's put some filters in. Let's put some proxies in. Let's try to just transparently stop them from doing something really bad and let them get on with their jobs,
Yeah.
right? I think that's just sort of a prototype. And that's a lot of the stuff we're doing. Like I said, we had Jira tickets, right? That's prevalent for
Hmm.
software developers. So it's very easy for us to tell the dev teams, hey, you need to do this. But when we're onboarding
Hmm.
cloud IAM accounts from people who are not in the dev community, having to do that isn't easy. So we're creating portals that make this a lot easier. That it
Hmm.
just becomes a click, and it already knows the
Yeah.
SSO and says this is who I am, and you don't have to fill in all kinds of information, right? So it's
Hmm.
finding those little bits of technology that you can connect together, hopefully through cool APIs like we talked about earlier,
Yeah.
that sort of make it so that it fits within the framework of what people are
Hmm.
trying to achieve. I think that's really
Yeah,
really
they're
key.
getting the familiar with what they're used
Exactly.
to. So rather than changing to something that's completely different,
Exactly.
I think that's really really critical. Kind of direction. So what kind of curious about? So what would you like to see? More of. What was missing at RSA that you would expected to see more of that you didn't see?
Um, I think, generally speaking, I think that some of the sessions went a little bit more shallow this year. I'd like to see some deeper sessions.
Hmm.
Like your session was
Hmm.
particularly good. It was very technical. It talked about the why and then showed, how, right? And I really am attracted to those sorts of, deep dive sessions.
Hmm.
But even for the softer things or the human things or even the CEO type
Hmm.
discussions, I felt that it went back to an old template from a few years ago,
Yeah.
which was not enough information density in
Hmm.
some of these sessions.
It's the actionable
Yeah,
side of things. That's what really kind
yeah,
of the key part is that. And thank you for the
yeah,
feedback. I mean, I wish I could have done my session better. I wish if I was to change, I would I would start the demo much earlier. I ran out of time for the demo portion, so that's what I kind of realized that going back, I was like, oh, the demo worked great, but I should have started it much earlier because that's the more interesting aspect.
yeah,
Um, so when you're doing those, you always learn
yeah,
from
yeah, of
it. So
course.
you do. So,
But I always find, again,
but
the important
absolutely,
thing is
yeah,
the why, right? And that's what really
yeah.
draws me in is when the audience can
Hmm.
understand why something is happening or why something needs to be done or why it was done a certain way. It just for me it's just
Hmm.
a lot more compelling. So moving forward, I would like to see RSA, sessions that I would like to see some on the AI side. I think that again is it's an
Hmm.
emerging topic. I think I've
Yeah.
seen some really interesting information coming out recently around threat modeling of AIs. What do
Hmm.
those models look like? Where are your risks, which I think are important to understanding any of these systems.
Hmm.
I'd really like to continue the trend on being able to secure a more broadly set of assets. So I won't use
Hmm.
the ZT acronym around what it is, but the reality is that our data and our assets and our
Hmm.
people are no longer constrained inside of a castle and behind a moat, right? The
Yes.
days of us, living in an office and sitting all together where you can put up hard defenses doesn't make sense. And not just from an IT
Mhm.
perspective, really from, all kinds of assets, whether it's development or it's data or it's compute. I'd
Mhm.
really like to see a lot more focus on how techniques for being able to make sure that you can understand where your assets and data are, how you scale that to multi-cloud, and then
Mhm.
also deal with regional and sovereignty issues, because that's the other big trend I
Okay.
see
Yeah.
coming. Is that countries and nation states are really taking a much more keen interest, not only
Mhm.
on your assets and data, but also on your process, your security. Completely different set of organizations want to take an interest in how you do things. And I think it's starting to sort of move the industry towards siloing again, where we're going to start putting up
Yes.
borders and boundaries. And all of that brings security. It changes the security landscape. Your threat model is no longer a pretty picture with just a couple of AWS blobs on it. It becomes a much bigger beast with its own circulatory system and living and breathing
Mhm.
systems that keep everything in check. And trying to secure that is always going to be a challenge.
Yeah, the regulatory that very much the nation states are all kind of looking to kind of keep certain data related to their citizens in within their land borders. And definitely for those listening, definitely go and look for the episode that I talked about the data embassy. That's so something that Estonia has been utilizing in order to deal, at least to allow their citizens' data to be outside the physical land of the country, and be still under the sovereign law within other locations. So it's always an interesting
Yeah,
episode to listen to. Bob, it's been fantastic having you on. It's very insightful, very educational as
yeah.
always. Getting kind of your feedback and kind of your views on what you learned from RSA and the networking side of things, and some of the outlooks, and how you're putting those into action within your organization. It's always fantastic listening in. Any final thoughts? Any final takeaways for the audience that you kind of want them to take away with?
I would say, my big takeaway is, I would say, find something that works for you and do try to attend events like this. RSA is the big one, but it doesn't have to be the big
Yeah.
one. Find one in your region. I think I'm a particular fan of B-sides. I think that they are
Yeah.
very regional. They usually reflect the community that they're being run in, so you can usually connect with a lot of people with similar things.
Mhm.
But it doesn't have to be those. I'd say really find some folks in that are convenient for you to geographically get with,
Mhm.
because as fun as consuming these stuff on YouTube after they publish them or make them live afterwards, there's really no substitute for having a face-to-face conversation with somebody who has some shared
Mhm.
experience, but also can bring a different perspective.
Absolutely, it's the conversations in the hallway sometimes are the most
Yeah.
valuable from events, and I definitely cherish and value all of the lessons I've learned from the hallways and the networking, especially people like yourself and others that I've met. I've learned a lot from those interactions, so very much appreciate it. And so for the audience, I hope you really enjoyed this. This is another fantastic education to getting the key takeaways and some of the kind of the top trends that we're looking at, and some things that Bob has put into place that really looking at in order to kind of from the empathy and the culture side of things, which I think is vital to our industry. So again, tune every 2 weeks for the 401 Access Tonight podcast. I'm the host, Joe Carson, and again, many thanks, Bob, for being here and sharing your insights and really great experience and knowledge with
Yeah,
the
my
audience.
pleasure.
Again, thank you very much, and for everyone, take care, stay safe, and see you in 2 weeks' time.